What's going on, everybody? Happy 4th of July. I hope your holiday is treating you well. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Appreciate you guys being here today, even on the holiday. I've got a fun discussion for us to go over, and that is which of these Green Bay Packers on this current 90-man roster can actually make the 53-man roster as training camp ends and you actually go into the season. Because I think we get so caught up in actually making a 53-man roster and saying who's going to make it, who's not, that we sometimes can lose sight of just how many talented players are on this team. And more importantly, which players actually have a chance. Where are these roster battles taking place? Who is a potential player who can make the team and maybe push somebody else out? And more importantly, as I talked about in an episode I did a year ago, I do think we need to start getting away from acting like this is just a 53-man roster. This is a 69-man roster. You've got a 53-man active roster, and you have a 16-man practice squad. And the truth is that there are a huge chunk of these players that are going to play at some point this season, whether they make the initial 53-man roster or not. There are going to be practice squad call-ups. There are going to be injuries. There are going to be a variety of ways in which players on this team are going to need to be used. Heck, yesterday, we did a huge breakdown of Bo Melton. Bo Melton was not a player who made the initial 53-man roster. He was a practice squad guy. Corey Ballantyne was a practice squad guy. And look at the impact that both of those two guys had by the end of last season. It was massive for what they were able to accomplish. So it is not just about the 53-man roster. And that's why I want to take a more organic look at which players are talented enough to actually be called upon if in fact they are needed, and which of these guys can be 53-man roster players, whether it is now or after a practice squad call-up or after injuries, or maybe some of these guys will even end up on a 53 on another team. That is within the realm of possibility as well. So let's go over it. Let's start at quarterback. There are 3 quarterbacks on the roster, and all 3 very clearly are players who can and maybe will make the 53-man roster. Jordan Love goes without saying. Sean Clifford, Michael Pratt could theoretically be fighting for one spot, or both of them could just make the team. Either way, we know that Jordan Love and Sean Clifford are 53-man roster guys because they were obviously 53-man roster guys in the past. And we know just how much Brian Gutekunst loves keeping his draft picks. Now, he will cut a draft pick from time to time, specifically a 7th rounder. And that's exactly what Michael Pratt is. I would be willing to say, even in the glimpses that I saw in OTAs and mini camps already from Michael Pratt, even some of the buzz surrounding him from, you've got the scouting director from the Reese's Senior Bowl, and we've got Jim Nagy, I should say, we've got a ton of people that have come out and say Green Bay got an absolute steal in Michael Pratt. Do you really want to let that just walk out the door and subject it to waivers? Probably not. I think he's already, in just a short amount of period of time that we've seen him, or specifically I've seen him and the media has seen him, because I know unfortunately the fans have not, which still needs to change, by the way. They need to open up minicamp, but that's another topic for another day. Either way, what we've seen from him already is enough to say, hey, I don't think you want to lose that guy. I think there's enough developmental potential there. And maybe that means that Jordan Love and Michael Pratt make the team. Okay, possibly. But if Sean Clifford is your backup, there is the possibility that Michael Pratt is the 3. Even if Michael Pratt wins the backup, there's a chance or possibility that Sean Clifford is your 3. And all of them make the 53-man roster because they are young, they are talented, and you don't want to give them up just quite yet. So all 3 capable of making a 53, and I think that kind of goes without saying. So let's spend more time on other positions. At running back, I think there are 4 players that truthfully can make the 53. Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, A.J. Dillon, and Emmanuel Wilson. Now, I'll talk about Jarvian Howard a little bit later. I do think he showed enough to me in his college tape that could this be one of those guys that has a really big training camp and preseason, gets his name in the conversation? Maybe, but I think he's probably just more destined for the practice squad, would be my guess. So I think there are 4 players on this team that are in the conversation. Are they likely to keep 4? Probably not. Is it possible? Maybe. But I think the big question here will be Emmanuel Wilson. But I'll go ahead and say again, Josh Jacobs, A.J. Dillon, Emmanuel Wilson have all made 53-man rosters already. Emmanuel Wilson was on the 53 last year. Go back and watch the Dallas game. Emmanuel Wilson, in the playoffs, Emmanuel Wilson actually got handoffs and snaps in that game. They started to utilize him a little bit more down the stretch. So we don't need to go into the entire A.J. Dillon discussion here again. Clearly, Dillon will have every opportunity to make this team. Lloyd and Jacobs are locks. So you have 4 running backs on this team that, in my opinion, are capable of being 53-man roster players. At fullback, 1, Henry Pearson. He's the only guy on the roster. Now, in large part, the reason why he might be a 53-man player is because he is the only player on the roster that does bring that fullback H-back mentality. Now, we've talked about, I think, Tucker Kraft, Ben Sims. I think, maybe a couple of those guys could play that H-back, maybe a little bit of fullback type of role. But if you want a real, true, living, breathing fullback on the team, it's Henry Pearson. And we've talked about all the different styles and flavors of players that the Packers have at running back and wide receiver and tight end. They have all of those, but the one style of player that they don't have is the fullback, unless they keep Henry Pearson or I guess find a fullback from some other spot. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility as well that Henry Pearson makes it on this team as a true fullback. It's kind of the one missing ingredient that if they do release him, put him on the practice squad, that they don't have. And they could call him up, but you only get so many call-ups through the course of the season. And, that you run through those pretty quick. Do I think it's super likely that Pearson's on the 53? No. But do I think he's capable of doing it? Yes. And do I think if Matt LaFleur wants a fullback, that Pearson's probably the guy? Also, yes. So I do think that he is on that list as well as somebody who could make the 53-man roster. At wide receiver, I think there's 8 guys. Now, I want to be crystal clear here. I am not saying Green Bay is going to keep 3 quarterbacks or 4 running backs or a fullback or 8 wide receivers. That is not what this exercise is about. It's saying how many players on this team are 53-man roster capable. And I believe there are 8. We know Dobbs, we know Watson, we know Jaden Reed, Bo Melton, Malik Heath, Dontavian Wicks. Those 6 are pretty obvious. In fact, Samori Toure is pretty obvious as well because he has been on the 53-man roster these past 2 seasons. And Grant Dubose was on the practice squad all last year, 7th round pick a season ago, and did get activated to the active roster and then subsequently deactivated, but that's neither here nor there. Grant Dubose is another player who I do think has that type of ability. It would not shock me if all 8 of those players were on a 53-man roster at some point this year. Now, it might take Samori Toure and Grant Dubose going to another team. That's possible. But either way, I do think Green Bay is 8 deep at players who can come in and help you on any given Sunday. And that depth is crazy at wide receiver. Now, the type of impact that a Samori Toure or a Grant Dubose may have is still up for grabs. We haven't really seen it out of Toure the past 2 years, and Dubose is still a projection and a question mark. He has to prove himself to show that he is capable of playing at that level, but I think he can. I really do. I think he can be a number 6 wide receiver on a 53-man spot. So I say 8 guys at wide receiver, which is pretty crazy depth. And there could be a couple wild cards in there as well. Julian Hicks, a player that I really like as an undrafted free agent that maybe could be in that conversation down the line also. But for now, 8 wide receivers on this roster that I do think are capable of making 53-man rosters. 4 tight ends, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, those go without saying, and then Ben Sims and Tyler Davis. In fact, here we are again. All 4 of these guys have already made 53-man rosters. Tyler Davis in numerous seasons, Ben Sims last year with Green Bay for the entirety of the year, and of course Kraft and Musgrave as rookies a season ago as well. So this one's not even arguable. All 4 of these guys have been 53-man players in the past. And in all likelihood, at least for Tyler Davis, I think he can be again in the future. We know Sims, Musgrave, and Kraft can be. So again, I wholeheartedly believe that these 4 tight ends will be in the conversation, and I would actually be pretty surprised if we didn't see all 4 of those tight ends be active on a 53-man roster this upcoming season. That brings us to offensive line. I believe there are 14 offensive linemen on this team that actually can make a 53-man squad. 14. Now, once again, I'll say that doesn't mean all 14 are going to. In fact, I would be willing to bet you a substantial amount of money Green Bay's not going to keep 14 offensive linemen. But let's go through these. Rasheed Walker, yep. Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Sean Ryan, Zach Tom, Jordan Morgan. Those all go without saying. Those are clear 6 and obvious ones, right? Caleb Jones made the 53 the last 2 years. Royce Newman has made the 53 the last 3 years. Now, on his contract, not likely, but I still think he probably ends up on a 53-man roster at some point this year. Jacob Monk, yeah, they're probably not going to cut, 5th-round pick? Doubt that happens. Andre Dillard, he's been on a 53 his entire career. He's going to have to earn it this year on a contract that's not guaranteed, but clearly he can make it. Luke Tenuta made it 2 years ago. Now he had to get claimed off of waivers, but he made it. And then last year, they kept him on the 53 before having to put him on IR, but did so with the hopes of being able to bring him back on the 53. So that's another guy. Donovan Jennings was their priority undrafted free agent. So I think he clearly is going to be in the conversation. They gave him $100,000 guaranteed, which isn't enough that they can't cut him by any means, but they clearly thought enough of him that they wanted to give him that bonus. And I do think that just based off of his college tape, he's talented enough to be a 10th guy or 9th guy on an offensive line. Travis Glover, again, Green Bay doesn't really cut draft picks. I really like what he looks like physically. I would be actually pretty surprised if he doesn't make Green Bay's 53. And then I'm even going Kadeem Telford here. Like I think Kadeem Telford is somebody that, now that he's kicked inside to guard, has looked pretty impressive. He's got really good size. We'd be talking about Kadeem Telford as this huge dude if Caleb Jones and Travis Glover weren't on the roster as well. He's a big freaking guy. And I like the fact that they've played him some at tackle, some at guard, and he's been moving people in OTAs and in mini camps, and hopefully that carries over to training camp. So Walker, Jenkins, Myers, Ryan, Tom, Morgan, Jones, Newman, Monk, Dillard, Tenuta, Jennings, Glover, and Kadeem Telford. That is 14 offensive linemen that I legitimately believe can make a 53-man roster. Poor Lecitus Smith, the one offensive lineman on the roster who did not make that cutoff. But that's why this is going to be such a battle. That's why Royce Newman's contract is probably a bit of an issue for him. That's why all of these guys, Luke Tenuta and Caleb Jones, are in must-win situation or make-or-break situations where they better show that they're capable of playing right now. Because if not, some of these guys, Travis Glover, Kadeem Telford, Donovan Jennings, Andre Dillard, Jacob Monk, they're going to take their spots, period, end of story. But I think they have 14 guys talented enough to make a 53. At edge, I think there's 6. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, LVN, Kingsley Ndigbare, those go without saying. Brenton Cox is clearly going to be in that conversation, and I think very likely worthy of a 53-man spot. And then I'll also go Keyshawn Banks. Keyshawn Banks was a practice squad call-up guy a season ago, did play in the 49ers game, 1 snap, but it was a snap nonetheless. He's got special teams ability. Now, do I think that you want him as a priority player on your 53? Clearly not. But do I think that he could be a 4th edge rusher for some teams that provides some pass rush, good run defense, and some special teams value? I do. I really do. He's going to have a tough job making a 53 for Green Bay, and he probably ends up back on Green Bay's practice squad. But I actually do believe there's enough talent there to warrant a 53-man roster spot. One guy I didn't mention here is Kenneth Odumegwu, and I talked about he's had a phenomenal OTA and minicamp so far, and I cannot wait to watch him in training camp. However, I'm not quite ready to put him in that. Clearly, he's a 53-man guy. He's just that's still a leap for a guy that's just started playing football a year ago. I think he's probably a practice squad guy again, specifically on the International Pathway program where they get that extra practice squad spot. So really, this is ultimately a 70-man roster with Odumegwu, but it would still take a jump for me to say, yeah, he's competing for a 53 spot. Could he be by the end of camp? Maybe, but I'm not quite ready to put him there just yet. Interior defensive linemen, once again, 6 deep here. Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, TJ Slayton, and Colby Wooden all go without saying. And then Jonathan Ford. Like Caleb Jones, like Luke Tenuta, this is a make or break year for Jonathan Ford. He has to step up now. He has to show that he's ready to play, and he has to show that he has a skill set that's useful on game days, that's worth activating, that's worth keeping on a 53-man roster. But don't forget, when they made cutdowns a season ago, Jonathan Ford made the initial 53. So clearly they thought enough of him to keep him on. Now they had to do some roster manipulation and eventually had to release him and bring him back on the practice squad. But clearly he was one of the, 1 or 2, 3 guys that they were considering for that final roster spot and thought was close enough to be able to make that 53-man squad, at least initially. It's going to take him stepping up this year. It really will. But I think he will be in that conversation once more. Linebacker, another 6 spot. Quay Walker, Edgerrin Cooper, Tyron Hopper, Isaiah McDuffie, Eric Wilson, and Christian Welch. So it's pretty easy, right? Cooper and Tyron Hopper as 2nd and 3rd round picks. They're not going anywhere. They're locks to make the 53. Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, Eric Wilson, and Christian Welch all were on the 53 a season ago. I don't think Raylan Goforth, I don't think Christian Young are in that conversation, but I think they've got 6 guys that are capable of making a 53, and again, either have already or are locks to make it this year in the case of Edgerrin Cooper and Tyron Hopper. Corners, we've got 8, maybe 7, but I'll go 8, and I'll go over the 8th one in just a second. Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, Kalen King, and Corey Ballantyne are all clear and obvious. Valentine, Nixon, Stokes, and Jair have all made 53-man rosters. Kalen King is a 7th-round draft pick. Again, we know Goody loves keeping his draft picks. Certainly not a lock by any means as a 7th-round guy, but he can make the 53. Robert Rochelle was on the 53 a season ago as number 7, and I do think his special teams ability will get him in that conversation and competing with a Kalen King. And then I'll also throw Gemmin Green on here specifically because he has been a 53-man roster guy in his career. Do I think it's super likely that he gets back there for Green Bay? No. Would it shock me if at some point some team was desperate for a corner this year and Gemmin Green became that guy because he's actually played and he's got some special teams value? No, I think that's, again, very, very possible. So I'll put Gemmin Green on this list. If we want to cut it down by 1 and just say 7, I'm okay with that. I'm not expecting Gemmin Green to make a huge push here for Green Bay. But again, he has been a 53-man roster guy in the past. At safety, 7. Xavier McKinney, clearly. Bullard, Oladapo, and Evan Williams, all draft picks that are probably in that range where, well, we know Bullard's not getting cut. Evan Williams is a 4th-round guy they traded up for, not getting cut. And Ketan Oladapo is a 5th-rounder, extremely unlikely to get cut. Zane Anderson, 53-man guy a season ago. Anthony Johnson Jr., 7th-round pick last year and a 53-man guy through the entirety of last season. And Benny Sapp was a 53-man guy a season ago. So that competition at safety is going to be crazy, not only for just who makes the team, but also who ends up in that number 2 spot, the number 3 spot, the number 4 spot. Like all of those are going to be just massively, massively competitive, which I guarantee you is exactly what Green Bay wants at those individual positions. Kicker, you can maybe make an argument 1 or 0, but I'll say 3. I think Anders Carlson and Greg Joseph are both going to battle this out. Joseph and Anders Carlson have both been 53-man roster guys in the past, and I will throw James Turner on there as well, mostly because I think it's anyone's game at this point. I think if any of these kickers go out and show well, they'll make the team. So if Turner is the best in training camp and preseason, he's going to be the guy. I feel super confident about any of that? Probably not, but I'll put all 3 on there for now, at least with the ability to make this Packers 53-man roster. Punter, only 1, Daniel Whalen, goes without saying, and then 2 long snappers, Matt Orzik and Peter Bowden. Both those guys will legitimately compete for the open long snapper spot this coming season, and it would not shock me if Peter Bowden ended up being that guy after Matt Orzik has struggled a little bit, specifically last year when Green Bay signed him to that free agent deal. I'll also add a little bit on top of this as well. I do think there is going to be 1 or 2 miscellaneous people that we're not talking about at all today that will eventually get their name in this conversation. There's usually an undrafted free agent or just a player that you're not expecting that all of a sudden steps up and is making a case for a 53-man spot. Maybe it is a Jarvion Howard at running back, a Joel Wilson at tight end, who I liked when I watched some of his tape when we did our breakdown of players you probably have never heard of. Julian Hicks at wide receiver was one of my favorite guys as a UDFA that I watched on tape. Is it going to be extremely difficult for Hicks to break that wide receiver room? Yes, but maybe he gets his name in the conversation. Spencer Waggy, who they picked off of waivers from the 49ers, huge RAS guy, kind of fits exactly what they're looking to do. Kenneth Odumegwu we talked about. Zion Gilbert's an interesting corner. Deslin Alexander is a unique pass rusher that had a pretty good OTA in minicamp. Christian Young was the player I liked most when I broke down the tape of those guys that we never really talked about before. So all of those guys, are they likely? No, but do maybe one of them get their name in the conversation as well? That wouldn't shock me either. So without even the miscellaneous guys, just putting those completely aside, there were 34 players on offense that we talked about that are capable of making a 53-man roster. And I like the only ones that maybe you could like have some sort of argument against, like maybe Kadeem Telfort, maybe Donovan Jennings. Everyone else is clearly in a conversation for a 53-man roster spot. But 34 guys, including Jennings and Telfort, that I think can make a 53. On defense, 33. And even if you want to, again, cut off Keyshawn Banks, even if you want to cut off Gemmin Green, those are probably the only 2 that you would consider potentially cutting off. That would still put you at 31. So 34 plus 33, and then 6 on special teams. That brings you to a total of 73 players, not even including those miscellaneous guys that can legitimately make a 53-man roster. There are 53 spots for those 73 guys. There are 16, or we'll say 17 with Odumegwu in this case, practice squad spots. There are 70 total spots. And I'm saying there are 73 guys that either have made a 53-man roster or should theoretically be capable of making one this year or in the near future. That's a lot of competition. That is a ton of competition at a lot of different spots. And the Packers still have one roster spot to fill, at least as of recording this. It's possible that they could pick up another guy that is capable of making a 53. Maybe they just grab some random undrafted free agent back of the roster guy who doesn't really have a chance, or maybe they go and get a veteran or someone that clearly is going to be competing for a roster spot. And that would add one more name to that group. Now, there were a handful of players that did not make the list. We did mention a few of these on our potential miscellaneous guys, but the players that did not make the list of potential 53-man guys: Ellis Merriweather, Jarvion Howard, Joel Wilson, Messiah Swinson, Lecitus Smith, Alex Magoo, Dimitri Stanley, Julian Hicks, Kenneth Odumegwu, Aaron Mosby, Deslin Alexander, Spencer Waggy, James Esther, Christian Young, Raylan Goforth, Tyler Coyle, and Zion Gilbert. Those were the 17. Those are the 17 that are probably going to have to work the hardest to get their name in that conversation. Could any of them get the name in their conversation for a practice squad spot? Absolutely. And then you go from there. Just take it from Corey Ballantyne or Bo Melton the season ago, where they were on the practice squad. And again, look at the impact they were making by the end of the year. And both of them pretty much locks to make the roster this upcoming season. So making the practice squad, certainly not any sort of, determining factor of your ultimate fate. You can still go out and have a impactful year for the Packers this year by being on the practice squad. So those guys can still easily fight for that. And I'll end here by saying a huge amount of credit to Brian Gutekunst, because he has put in obviously a lot of effort and a lot of energy, a lot of time in working with his staff and his front office, his college scouting staff, his pro scouting staff, to put together this team that has a lot of high-end talent, a lot of exciting youthful players that are progressing in the right direction, and a potential roster here that I think has 73 guys that could end up on 53-man rosters, either in Green Bay or elsewhere this season. And that competition should be something that fuels this team moving forward. So Brian Gutekunst deserves a ton of credit. Let me know if there's anything that you disagree with. Is there anyone on this list that, that I said could make a team that you think there's no chance? Is there anyone that was on that list of 17 players that you think does have a good chance to make the 53? Would love to hear from you guys. You guys are always the best. Thank you for showing up, even on a holiday, even on the 4th of July. Like I said, I hope your holiday is treating you well. Shout out to our Hall of Fame and All-Pro members: Mo Saden, Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Shea Bradad, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Dan Miller, Alex Huang, Arnaldo Espinoza, Dan Gesford, and Peter Ataka. I'll see you guys tomorrow, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.